Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fearsome Flowing podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Monique Renée, and we have been doing this podcast for 3 years. I just love having these fierce conversations with individuals who have been along my journey and others who I have just been so inspired by that I've asked them to come on here and share their stories of moments when they have been fierce in their life, getting out of their own way, doing what they know their soul is asking them to do, no matter how hard it is. And also just taking the leap so that we can feel and experience more joy and what I'd like to call sacred success and flow in our lives, which is truly different, for every guest that I've had on this podcast. So today is no different. I'm super excited to introduce you to my friend, Drew Golburgh. And Drew is currently the Associate Director of Florida International University's One Stop. And he has been teaching and leading people now for over 27 years. Drew says that the most important lesson that he has learned is that people are happiest when their needs are supported and they are free to make decisions according to their values. And I love this so much because I know not only on my own leadership path, which has been a journey getting there, but also along the way, learning and teaching leadership and understanding how difficult leadership really is and also how hard it is to create an environment where you actually allow people to show up as themselves in their strengths with their values. It's not an easy thing to do, but the outcome is always, a beautiful thing. So Drew, welcome.
Thank you, Monique. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, the last time we got together, which wasn't long ago, we had lunch. We caught up after about, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
eight
probably
years, 7 years.
maybe longer actually.
Maybe longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And quickly our conversation landed on happiness, right? I was just a few weeks out of attending the Oahu World Happiness Summit, and I was still on my high. And I know that you've had so much, excitement of your own diving into happiness, being exposed to Dr. Sandro Formica's work, which we'll talk about. And so that was such a fun conversation. I love sitting down with, don't we all love sitting down with people who believe what you believe? So that was such a joy just having a conversation around what makes people happy, what an engaged workplace looks and feels like, what we feel when we are disengaged as leaders, right? And that's a hard thing to kind of talk about or look in the mirror and say, wow, I think I'm disengaged. What do I do about this, right? So today, I want to follow your journey a little bit. I think you have some great stories to share that so many people not only are going to relate with, but also learn from and maybe recognize in themselves so that they can, take some steps toward their own happiness, their own engagement, but also being servant leaders in the world, which I think you are, And so we're going to talk a little bit about this journey of fear, what fear gets us into in our lives. And then from that fear, being connected with moments on our path that introduce us to our purpose, right? And then from there, recognizing how others in our lives can also help us to recognize what our gifts are, what our strengths are, and that further expands our purpose. And then hopefully wrapping this up with what you're doing to create that happiness, not only for you as a leader, but in your team and what that trajectory has looked like over the past few years. So I'm really excited. I want to start with this. You wrote this for me, and you said the discovery of my purpose happened only after I pursued a career out of fear. So, gosh, I've been there. I think so many of I still find myself in those moments where I'll say yes to something that my gut says this is not for you, but for whatever reason, I say yes out of a fear. and I'm able to get myself out of it more quickly now, because of all of my experience, because of the work that I do and the age that I am. But take us back to that time. What career were you in? What was this fear? How did that manifest in your life?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, yeah, I graduated from University of Miami in 1994. I graduated in the winter time though, so I took an extra semester
Okay.
because I had transferred. So right before I graduated, I had gone on a road trip in the summer prior to my last semester with my best friend who had already graduated from University of Florida. And we're on a road trip, basically driving from Oregon all the way to Vegas. And then the idea was, drive to Vegas, have fun, go back to Oregon. I'd fly home and finish college and decide and figure out what I was going to do. But I literally had no idea.
Right.
Um, so my best friend Miguel at the time, his father was launching a business in Oregon, which is why they moved out there. And so he knew exactly what he was doing. And it was summer for him, and he was getting ready to start his new life. And I was going back to school, really completely lost. So we're
Mm,
in a hotel room one night, and he's on the phone with his father, and they're talking about the business and what happens when he gets back from the road trip. And all of a sudden, he goes, hold on, Dad. And he says to me, Hey, Drew, my dad is asking if after you graduate, do you want to come and work with us and help start the business and the whole thing? And it was literally like a lightning bolt from heaven at the
mm,
time.
yeah.
And without even thinking, to be completely honest, without even thinking, I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about finishing school. I was like, yes.
Wow.
And it was very strange at the time. It just a weight was lifted. I'm like, oh, I know now exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm
Right.
gonna, yeah, I'm gonna move out here with my best friend and I'm gonna live with him and his family and I'm gonna start a business.
You know what's interesting, what showed up for me right now, kind of intuitively, is that sometimes we're so fearful of stepping into our power and answering our own questions because
Yeah.
we think we're not capable of, right? And that's it. We're young at that age, in our lives where we're studying, about to graduate. We haven't had a lot of experience yet, but it's almost easier to say yes to someone just solving your problems for you, right? Instead of kind of, today we call it mindfulness, sitting, listening to your own gut, to your what your mind is saying about things, and being able to decipher when a decision is right for you, or do I even know myself enough to be able to make this decision, right? What were you studying in college, by the way? What was your degree in?
I was an English major, but
Okay.
really I thought I was a film major. Um, I
Okay.
had I had transferred from University of Florida to go to film school at UM.
Okay.
Thinking I'm going to be a director. I love movies,
Yeah.
and literature was my second major, actually.
It's
Yeah.
a very Piscean thing. I know you're Pisces like me.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I throw in astrology in here for those who may be interested in it. But one of the things that most people don't know about Neptune rules Pisces, and Neptune also rules the industry of film and movies. And so it's not uncommon for a Pisces, to at some point or another think about, being either in film or behind the scenes. And so I just find that to be so cool. I actually almost went to film school myself.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at FSU, but I ended up doing public relations instead.
Yeah.
So, now was that out of a desire? When you decided what my major is going to be in college, was that just an impulse or,
In hindsight, I'm seeing a pattern actually, even as we're talking. So at UF, my second year at UF, had no idea what I wanted to do, literally not a clue. And I was very depressed. I really couldn't study, almost like I
okay,
had almost paralysis. All my
right.
friends were there. I had a great social life, but
Yeah.
couldn't, I couldn't do school. I would go to the library, Monique, and I would sit down. I'm like, I'm going to study. And I would go to the library and I would sit in the library. And after 5 minutes, I would feel this intense, just pressure, or I don't know what
Mm,
it was, but it was like I'd run out of there.
wow.
So I didn't really know what to do. The only thing I really knew was I loved movies,
Okay.
horror movies. And I
Yeah.
thought, you know what? Let me go pursue the one thing that I know for a fact that I really love.
I love that. And I don't fault you for that. I actually today when sometimes I'll coach students leaving high school, thinking about, what they want to study in college. And we dive deep into their strengths, we dive deep into their passions. And I think there's nothing wrong, especially today, with studying what you love and having that then just be a starting point, to
Yeah,
what shows
but
up.
I actually do I agree with you, although I do think that's one thing that I learned over the years. Um, and I did become a teacher. I'm sure that we're going to get
Yeah,
there in a
we're gonna
minute,
get
but
there.
I, I always taught in my classroom, pursue your dreams,
Yeah,
right? Go after your dream. Everything is attainable if you work for it, if you want it, if you do all these things. And in a way, I think that was the decision that I had made at that moment when I did transfer.
yeah,
But what I didn't know, and you mentioned earlier, I really did not know myself very well at all back then.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I knew everybody else very well, but I didn't really know myself.
right.
And I think that that decision actually was also totally a fear-based decision. I didn't know what I wanted, where I was. I was walking around just lonely all the time, even though surrounded by my friends.
Sure.
And I thought, why don't I, I'll go home and do this, pursue my dream. But I didn't
Yeah,
really know at the time what my strengths were.
right.
No clue.
No
I
clue.
love to play sports and I love to read. And I love
Right.
talking to people about their problems.
Yeah.
That was it. That was
Ding,
it.
ding, ding. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Back then we didn't have Strengths Finder. I'm sure there were some assessments, but that just wasn't part of the process,
Yeah.
right? For us
Yeah.
going to school. And hence a lot of people our age shifting our careers midway, finally recognizing who we are, what we're here to do, where my gifts lie, and then, onward to another journey midway through life.
Yeah.
But okay, so you took on this job really out of fear. Although I'm sure it sounded like there was a little bit of excitement there, which is kind of cool, an adventure of some sort.
Yeah, but yes, yes. And the excitement was a fantasy.
Yeah.
It really the excitement was the fantasy. It was the idea
Right.
of this fantasy world where I
Yeah.
was going to go run a business with my already very successful best friend's father, and
Right.
I'm going to get rich and we're going to, have this great life. That really was, I think, what I was thinking at that time.
So how did it go? What was the reality of the situation?
The first 6 months was the most exciting time probably of my life,
Okay.
which was getting ready to open the business.
Right.
It was the first time I had worked collaboratively like this, just every single day, completely ensconced in business and development and creative thinking.
Yep.
I learned so much from my friend's father, who had been in business already for like 35 years, and this was him starting a new business already very late in life. So I had this incredible mentorship and this incredible experience of really learning from A to Z
Yeah.
so much of what goes into it, the work, I
Yeah.
mean, 18, 20-hour days.
Wow.
And, again, overcoming fears literally every day. I mean, doing something I'd never done every single day, something new, something different, being directed, go and do this, go and do that. It wasn't like I had a choice.
Yeah.
And it was incredible, incredible. About a week before we were going to open, and again, this is a long time ago. So this is
Yeah.
going back really to
Sure.
1996.
Okay.
Um, I thought I was going to be the in-store manager, ended up becoming the salesman.
Mm.
And a salesman for this company, Batteries Plus, is a traveling salesman essentially in a truck, driving out, within a 75-mile-an-hour radius to farms, to police
Wow.
stations, just doing, again, never in my life have I sold anything. Never in my life had I knocked on a door, except when I was in elementary school to say,
Right.
please sponsor me to read a book. I don't know if you
Yes,
remember when we used to have to read books when we were little,
I
and we
do.
would knock on doors and get sponsorship and we read all the books. That's the only time I literally had ever done that in my life. And
Wow.
I'm going out to farms, to gas stations, to ask people if they wanted to buy batteries from this brand new company that just opened up. So it was really traumatic. I had
Yeah.
a extremely difficult time.
Yeah.
I made a few sales here and there, which were some exciting moments, but I had no idea what I was doing. I had no background or foundation at all to sell,
Yeah.
to be told no
Yeah.
every single day, over and over, by the same people over and over. And then being told that you got to go back to those people again, next week.
Yeah.
And I just had no tools. So
Right.
one thing led to another. And one night, I used to have a meeting at the end of every day with my boss, and he would quiz me as to my route, conversations, um, and I used to start making up
Wow.
the answers.
Yeah.
And I found myself eventually parking somewhere and
Yeah,
just
getting lost in all of it.
it was it
Oh,
was really really tough time. And it was
yeah.
my best friend and my
Yeah.
best friend's father, and I had this tremendous feeling of responsibility and duty, and I just physically could not do it.
Yeah.
So I got home one night and I was rooming. Miguel and I at this time had moved out. He and I were roommates. Um, and I got home. It was probably 7 o'clock at night. I went into my room, got under the covers, and just started shaking violently
Mm.
for what felt like 45 minutes. I don't know how long it was, but it was really horrible. And I'd never experienced that before. And that was it. From after that, I decided I could not do it anymore.
Yeah. Your body was literally
Yeah,
telling
that's
you it was time.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And okay, so that was the moment where you're like, okay. I mean, you see it now, you don't see it then, but
Yeah.
yeah, I took this out of fear. Um, and but then you share with me that there's a moment where you actually realize, wow, I think this is my purpose. What was
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I actually just told this story recently.
Did you?
It's the most exciting moment I think of my life, and it feels like yesterday. So after a while, about 6 months later, I did transition out very quickly. They were wonderful. I ended up working at an insurance company for about 6 months just to try to pay the bills while I was trying to
Okay.
figure out what I was going to do. So I came home and I enrolled at FIU in a master's program, Master's of English Education.
Okay.
Teaching was always something that was there in the back of my mind,
Okay.
for even from when I was younger. But teachers don't make any money, and I had no interest in doing that, and because of financially.
Yeah.
It just was not something that I ever truly considered seriously, especially K-12.
Right.
I had thought momentarily about college,
Yeah.
professor, literature, that kind of thing. So I start going to school. I'm getting my master's at FIU, working two jobs, at a gym, at a law firm, and I registered or applied to become a substitute teacher.
Okay.
And fortunately, I had a friend of mine who was an assistant principal. He invited me into a middle school, said, "You can come and sub here, see how you like it." And Monique, it's an amazing thing. I went in, again, never done it. I had never done it in my life. I had no understanding of what it meant to walk to a classroom full of kids.
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there first thing." And I walked into this class, and all the kids are in there, and they're looking up at me like, "Who's this guy?" I think it might have been like a sixth or seventh grade class, and there was just this immediate moment of this, just I don't know, this feeling just came over me like, oh, like this feels like where I belong.
Wow.
And it was amazing, and I don't know really where all that came from, but
Yeah.
there was a sort of a creative spark,
Yeah.
um, and some sort of empathy that I
Hmm.
felt for these kids. I'm talking like the first period of the first time I ever did this. By
Hmm.
the end of that first period class, I think they were block scheduling.
Right.
I had we had discussed poetry. I had learned about some of the kids. Yeah, it was amazing. And I
Wow.
just from that moment on, I just knew like this was where I needed to be.
I
Um,
love this. And I love this conversation because um, you know that one of the tools I use as a coach in working with, organizations is strengths. It's an easy language.
yeah,
But even though it's easy and we get our list of our top five and we read it and we're like, yeah, this is me, it's hard to go past that. It's like,
yeah,
how do I really understand and know that these are my strengths, right? And we know through research that strengths lead to our purpose. They lead to flow. They lead to health. They lead to, productivity and positivity and all these and engagement, all these wonderful things. But it's for me, it's like if you can put language and feelings to it, that's where the proof is, right? So going back to how your body literally rejected the job you were in, to now this feeling of I can only I can only put words in your mouth and you can tell me. I'd actually love to challenge you to see if you can come up with like, this is what I felt, right? Was it peace? Was it joy? Was it exhilaration? Was it creativity? Did you feel tingles in your body? Like, what was it that you felt that had you believe, I think this is it. I think this is my purpose.
I never at that age, 25 or
Yeah,
26, whatever age I never would have used the word purpose then.
sure.
But I would have used definitely excitement, and I think a sense of responsibility. I,
I
I think
love
I
that.
felt I felt a sense of responsibility that I could actually meet.
Gotcha.
And I know that sounds
No, like a fulfillment.
finicky.
Like I can
Yeah,
I can do good here.
yeah,
I
kind
can
of.
contribute.
Kind of. But
Okay.
but really it was even maybe more narrow than that in the
Uh-huh.
sense that I felt like I felt like I could offer something to these kids that I recognized very quickly that they were not really never had the didn't have the opportunity to receive.
Right.
And again, that may have been assumption at the time, but I felt it right away. Just it, some of the conversations that I would have for them. And I think that is one of my, by nature, the word why. And if you
Yeah.
ever ask any of my ex-students, they're immediately going to go crazy because I was the why. I always ask why. So even then with these, middle school, I think that was what happened. I think I was asking them questions about themselves.
Yeah.
I would
They're
ask,
like somebody cares about what I think.
yeah, and then the follow-up question, you would see the shock in their faces, like,
Right.
oh, he's asking me another question, and that for me was electric.
Wow.
And that's kind of really was the springboard really to everything that I've
You
done
saw
since.
them light up and that lit you up. It's interesting because one of your, again, for those of you who are new to this podcast, for those guests who are allowing me to do so, I look at your birthday and share with you pieces of your personality and how it ties to your story, to your purpose, um, and you have an archetype in your astrology. And right now, I'm speaking about feng shui astrology. It's a very simplistic, elegant astrology. But your life purpose, according to this language, is to be a transformer, is to not only transform your own life, which means you're going to go through these periods of like, oh, like the one you shared with us, right? It's earth shattering. It's like, oh, but you transform yourself out of that, right? But you're here to transform others. Like literally get them to answer the question of why and see themselves in a new way, elevate their experience in life, connect with their purpose. Like this is what you're here to do as a transformer. So congratulations, you got there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, my experience in the cloud. So after the middle school,
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be a middle school teacher.
Okay.
And again, I never use the word fate, but in a way, fate may have stepped in.
Yeah.
And before this school could hire me, I actually got hired by Homestead Senior High School.
Okay.
And the way it works in Dade County, for those if you don't know or those that don't know, once you're hired, once a school says we want to hire you, you're pretty much locked in, uh,
Yes.
unless you like don't ever answer your phone again, and these whole things that
It's
go
hard
on.
to get teachers fired.
It's a very strange, yeah, very strange the way that all works. So literally 2 hours later, the middle school did call me. They wanted to hire me, and I said, I'm sorry, like Homestead offered me the job.
Right.
But in hindsight, again, like I said, just I was very fortunate. And what I realized immediately there, I started teaching ninth grade,
Yeah.
was the age level, right? So these
Yes.
were these were students who were more mature.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have a style really yet,
Mm.
I didn't know what my style was. I didn't really, even the whole questioning and answering, I
Sure.
was a substitute teacher, so I could do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
So I didn't really quite know what I would be when I walked into the classroom, but clearly that's what I was.
And your
Um,
gifts developed naturally.
yeah. And what I found during that time, my first 2 years are always very rough. But by my third year, I started to see how, by asking questions,
Yeah.
by giving my attention
Yes.
to every individual student, which is so difficult. But when you have a classroom of 30 students and you have six classes and 200 students, to give every individual student your full attention is really very unrealistic.
It is.
But somehow through this process that I just sort of naturally started to develop, um, I think that's where I learned the idea that every individual child deserves
Yeah.
of your attention.
Yeah.
And when I stepped in front of those classrooms every single day for 8 years, I never felt a greater sense of responsibility than to those kids in that room for that hour, hour and a half.
Yeah.
And I always told my students, even from the beginning, I go, if there's ever a time when I don't feel this responsibility, that's it. That's it. And eventually that is what happened. It was the most incredible experience to see the way when I was able to direct kids' minds inward
Yeah.
into who they were by asking them why. Why do you think that?
Yeah.
Why do you have this idea? Why do
Yeah.
you feel what you feel?
Yeah.
At first, if by the way, it was chaos at first.
Sure.
My students would very much dislike me for the first 9 weeks.
Putting them on the spot,
They
having
would
them
yell,
do a hard thing.
Monique, they would yell back at me. What do you want me to say? Because I'd say, why? Why
Wow.
this? Why that? And they go, I don't know. And I'm like, of course you know. And then eventually they go, what do you want me to say? And I'd say, whatever you're thinking. And eventually they started to understand and they started to look inside, through poetry and literature and
Yeah.
movies, music. I was
Wow.
able to use everything. And once that was ignited, once the self-exploration piece, once they started to recognize, like, oh, I just learned something about myself that I never knew before. I really didn't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
They were electrified.
They
And
were,
that,
and yeah, they were almost like in the professional world, I'll call this personal leadership. They had stepped in
yes.
to their personal leadership. And isn't, oh God, can you imagine? I know you and I were talking about the idealism of schools.
Yeah.
And but wow, to have a school where all of the kids, regardless of their age or grade, are sitting in that space of personal leadership and personal responsibility, where the teachers are really just igniting the fire and the kids are doing the rest themselves. It's almost like that pressure just kind of subsides and teaching can be so joyful again.
Yeah. I had two things. I had one thing, I had many, many students come to me throughout the years and say, Mr. Goldberg, I can't watch movies anymore. Because now every time I watch a movie, all I do is try to analyze what's going on and what's happening and why are those colors? Why did they use green? That was one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, and then the other thing I want to mention, and I think which goes back to the beginning of the conversation, which is that feeling of really discovering, my purpose.
Yeah.
I would walk around that school, Homestead Senior, and then Robert Morgan after that,
Right.
and all the teachers, my peers, would constantly be saying to me, "You're always smiling. Why are you always smiling?" And I was very conflicted because part of me was like, I'm smiling because I love what I'm doing and I'm happy and this is the greatest. But the other part of me was, well, why are you not smiling? And
Right.
why is the fact that I'm smiling all the time such a surprise to you? And that was a whole nother
Yeah, that's
um
poignant.
yeah,
One of
yeah.
my favorite statistics that I love to share with people, because I'm a product of someone who got very sick because of toxic leadership and didn't know it until I left that location a year later and I got better immediately. The next day, my illness was gone and it was a huge eye opener to me. And so I really care about the things that help make us well when it comes to our careers, our purpose, our leadership, our flow. And one of the statistics that Gallup, shares with us is that individuals who know their strengths and are able to leverage them more and more every day, the more hours in a day that we can actually purposely say, I am using my talents and my strengths, and say that with conviction, the more times they are caught smiling during the day.
Yeah.
So there's a direct link between smiling and happiness and pleasure
Yeah.
and, using our talents and strengths.
Yeah. When you mentioned that you got really sick, what
Yeah.
so I had mentioned earlier that mine came
My
out.
body. It came out of
What
my
was
body. Yeah. I
yeah, how?
I developed severe allergies.
Oh,
Um, you would touch me and I would break out into hives everywhere on my face. And they were not small little hives.
yeah,
This was like an out, like you could literally see them. It looked like I had scars on my body.
yeah,
Itchy, sneezing, colds, like my body would break down. My body was broken down
yeah,
for yeah, it was a year in that first job. Um, and then and then it went away. I was in a better place. But then I started to see it come back here and there when I was not in my own personal responsibility. And that's when the thought of leadership really kind of landed for me. And I said, I got to study leadership. I got to learn more about the connection between leadership and our well-being and engagement,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it was, yeah, it was severe allergies.
Yeah, so the more I learn about this as well, the physical, there's the emotional reaction, which I think
Yeah.
we tend to spend a lot of our time with
Yes.
emotion, right? But the physical, I think, is also just incredible. And when I think about my journey,
Yeah.
oftentimes I connect actually to how I felt physically
Right.
before emotionally.
Yeah.
Because especially for me, like emotionally, I'm pushing all that away,
Right.
right? And I'm constantly just
Of
looking.
course.
But the
Yeah.
physical, I can't. So when I left,
No.
yeah,
Yeah. And your
right?
body gets to a point where it just breaks down, and
Yeah,
this is why we see people having heart attacks on the job,
yeah,
hypertension, anxiety, panic attacks. This is the manifestation of toxic leadership or not taking personal responsibility for ourselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it really we have to have a combination of both, to be happy, to be engaged in the workplace. So yeah, interesting. So you
I'm actually,
were, yeah, go ahead, ask
well, I was
me.
only going to say just really quick.
Yeah.
It's very, I've never heard that type of journey before. In other words, your journey into leadership, you're describing almost as like a physical necessity. You had to figure out how to
Yeah.
get yourself in a position to lead, even if it was just to lead yourself.
Correct.
But I think that
And it really was about leading myself because I
yeah,
started to put together, I basically said to myself, yes, this is a sickening environment, but I made myself sick.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
They didn't make me sick.
yeah,
I allowed them to make me sick.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's where the difference is, right? And this is where we start to bring in, okay, this is how I can take control of my happiness. This is how I can take control of my environment. This is how I can take control of these relationships, what I choose to do, what I don't choose to do, where I have control, where I don't have control, where I get to take some risks in sharing with people the damage they're doing. And that means that I may lose my job if I share what I'm feeling, right? So there's so many components to this. And it really became so obvious to me because the first three leaders that I worked for out of college were all toxic, all of them. And
yeah,
and they didn't show up that way originally. They showed up, masked and manipulative, and I bought in. And then they revealed who they really were, right? It wasn't until I had what I know today to be a true leader, finally, that uncovered this need for me to go into leadership. Yeah. And do something about it. Not just for myself, but and that's when I really began to really learn who I was and understand myself, right? And that's not until my 30s. So, um so you were in um at the high school, Homestead, then Robert Morgan. When did you land in higher education?
So yeah, so it took a little while. Again, I never thought it wasn't something I ever really considered at this point that I would end up in higher ed at all.
Yeah.
I I left teaching. I had a desire to get into leadership at that point,
Yeah.
uh, but it really was more about. It sounds a little bit egotistical right now saying it out loud, but I've been teaching 8 years.
Yeah.
I was so fortunate as a teacher. My first 5 years, I taught in a magnet program, so I went. The students went with me every year, which was incredible in
That's
hindsight.
wonderful. Yeah.
Not all of them, but I would say about 60% from ninth grade to 12th grade, I had multiple times.
Yeah.
And it forced me, I had no choice. I couldn't, an English teacher, theoretically, you could teach the same thing every year because you have
Yeah.
different students every year.
Yeah.
And English is English. You're reading books, you're
Yeah.
analyzing, you're writing, right? But because I had the same students every year, I had to recreate my curriculum every single year
Wow.
because the same kids were coming in.
Yeah.
And that was just the most freeing experience to be forced to be creative,
Yeah.
experimental. Some years I would give homework, some years I wouldn't. Some years I would do everything in class. Some years I would do everything at home. And then class only was discussions. Some years I would do these it was just always different,
So
but
fun.
always very, very demanding. And I
Yeah.
always kind of knew where I wanted to end up at the end of the year,
Yeah.
uh, which most principals unfortunately don't understand. And that
No.
created a lot of problems.
Gotcha.
So by my 8th year, I really had reached the point that I mentioned earlier where I'm like, I just don't know how much more I can accomplish in the classroom. And online was becoming a thing. I
Yes.
started to think like, well, maybe I could take what I do to more people.
Mm.
Maybe the online environment is a way to reach more kids with what
Yeah.
I'm doing every single day. And then more in a leadership role, which I had no idea what that meant.
Right.
At this point, I had never had a leadership position. It wasn't something I'd ever like really aspired to be a leader or the
Right.
word leader.
Yeah.
But I had this incredible opportunity. I was hired to go run the English department for what was called at the time the University of Miami Online High School.
Okay.
It wasn't affiliated with UM. It was a private school in Broward called Sagemont, but they had
Okay.
leased the name UM. So I
Hmm.
went in there and I had a good leader for a moment. And he told me, the reason I hired you is because I know who you are and I know what you bring. And I want you to make this department great.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay. So for about a little bit more than a year, that was a dream job. I was working at home. I had little kids, babies. It
Yeah.
was just everything aligned, and it was just beautiful. It was an incredible experience. A very small team, and me along with my cohorts, the team that we had, we built this incredible program, really catering to a very unique population of kids who are traveling the world and
Right.
athletes and musicians and sailing yachts around the world. And
Wow.
Chris Everett Lloyd, like her tennis
Yeah.
academy, all those students were part of it. We used to go to Everett Academy and teach and like tutor them.
How
It was just
fun.
incredible.
Yeah.
And I was a leader. I had 3 TAs.
Okay.
We had a team that we would ideate and create things, and it was team building and all the stuff that I had never experienced before. We
Yeah.
were doing it, in a very tight way, but also very with a lot of urgency because this
Yeah.
was a smaller school, trying to grow.
Yeah.
So it was amazing. And I got a lot of good experiences there of empowering others. At one point, I was able to bring in another person because
Yeah.
we had like a full-time school and then we had an independent study. So I got to hire someone to run the independent study program
Okay.
and essentially work directly with that person to kind of launch this brand new idea. So I was doing, developing things, creating things, leading others, empowering others,
Yeah.
really in a very going from never having done that really, I mean, only with kids to
Sure.
do it in a professional environment.
I love that. What did
Yeah.
you learn about yourself? Like, what would you say, like pat yourself on the back here. Like, what makes you the unique leader that you are?
At that time, I mean, at that time, I don't know. I
Mhm.
think it was fear, honestly. I
Mm.
think the idea of not succeeding
Yeah.
was an unbearable thought. And I just started to learn to overcome all my doubt,
Mm.
just do.
Yeah.
There were so many tools I still didn't have. There's so many things that did lead me into troubled waters.
Yeah.
But I was always just like, okay, I cannot fail. I got to keep going. And I think for me, it was I just came to learn through all these experiences up to this point that as long as I could remain on my 2 feet
Yeah.
and remind that keep telling myself like, no, you can do this, then I felt like I could overcome all the doubt and the fear and the spiraling.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of spiraling all the time, at that point.
Sure.
I had never been told up to that point that I was a leader, that I could be a leader. I never really knew very much about what that really meant in terms of the role of a leader, in terms of the people and all
Yeah.
that. I was just doing almost on instinct.
Right.
So I think for me, it was just that like I can do this.
Yeah, it was an
Maybe this is like,
affirmation.
yeah,
It was an
yeah.
affirmation. Sometimes the fear leads us in the right direction, you know? And we have to learn how to recognize, is this a good fear? Or is this the kind of fear that's going to transform us and grow us, or is this a true fear that can lead us in the wrong direction, right? Um, there's a great book called The Gift of Fear, which is about recognizing the difference. Like, am I getting in my own way? And if I actually push through this fear, I can end up in a really, really good place, right? That next level of who I need to be.
Yeah.
But if I succumb to the fear, or when am I feeling a true fear where I have to, it's a warning, right? It's a warning that I'm stepping on territory. I need to walk in the other direction, right? Um,
I think thank you. So I think that's what the batteries plus thing.
yeah,
I think I succumbed to the fear
yeah,
and I gave up. I mean, essentially I gave up. And I think I didn't know how to ask for help then.
yeah.
And I think the fear, yeah, I definitely,
Looking
and I think
back
that was,
though,
yeah,
I mean, I think we could both agree that probably was not the best position for you anyway.
no, it
Right?
didn't, none of my
Definitely.
strengths.
Yeah, no, no, but it was a good learning, right? Like we all have to have these jobs. Like I remember I worked at Piggly Wiggly as a cash register. I was
Yep.
fired. I was
Yeah.
horrible. Horrible. Okay. I always tell people I'm not here to do any math. I'm not here to like budget cash registers. Like, no, that's not my strength. But it's a good skill to learn. It's a good skill to learn how to count money back to people because it was never taught to me.
Yeah.
And I was embarrassed when the first customer said, "Oh, you're not gonna count it back to me." I'm like, what is that? Like we have to go through those things where, oh, this is a skill I need to teach my kids,
Yeah.
and so we have these jobs that we have to do, skills, life skills we need to learn, like asking for things, trying to sell something. We all have to sell something in life at some point, but it doesn't mean that I need to be in sales. That's
Yeah.
not where my gift is, right?
Right.
There are others who are meant to be in sales. They shine. Oh my God, they get so much energy and they're so successful, right? Like that's a strength for them. That's a skill that they're
Yeah.
here to do. But anyway, I think I lost my train of thought. But anyways, I think we can both agree that that wasn't your purpose. Like you totally landed in your purpose, but to me, you were really following that voice from childhood, which is I love to read. I love books. I love creativity. I love to ask questions. I'm naturally curious, right? I'm a responsible person. I like to help others. I want to. So you were following kind of those internal nudges all along, which is what we're
Yeah.
supposed to do to land, in these pockets of purpose is what I call, because I don't believe we have one big, big, big purpose.
Mhm.
I just think that we have these pockets of purpose throughout our lifetime that if we are listening to our soul and following them and getting curious, and it's usually fear that will either prevent us or push us to go a little bit further even though we're fearful, because there's also a little bit of excitement and curiosity in there,
Yeah.
right? Like what if I could do this, even though I'm telling myself I can't do it, I don't know how to do it, I'm going to be horrible at it. We end up pushing ourselves, which is what you did, with all of this.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think that that's kind of where I think what I realized is that every decision I've made since then has been fear based,
Yes.
but used more productively. And
Yeah.
I've been able to
Yeah.
use fear with the idea, and this is another thing that I've always tried to really impart upon everyone, which is the only way to truly get what you want is to ask for it.
Yes.
That was the lesson that I followed ever since. So getting back to your question, our school, the private school was purchased by Kaplan, which is a
Okay.
major
Yep.
education company. So I saw an opportunity to leave again and kind of start my own business. Short story, there's sister companies. There was the school and a curriculum company. The owner leader of the curriculum company was going to leave because Kaplan bought everything. He was going to leave and start a new curriculum company from scratch. And I had met him only a couple of times, and I had reached out to him and said, "Hey, it was great meeting you when I met you, and I was so impressed with your work. If you ever decide to do anything, I would love to come and join you."
Wow.
And like like a lightning from heaven, he calls me a couple weeks later. I'm no exaggeration, and says, "Hey, this is what I'm going to be doing, and I'm looking for a curriculum director, someone with your experience who could build an entire curriculum 9 through 12."
Wow.
And just like I did with Batteries Plus, I said yes, and I
Yeah.
didn't even know what it meant. Curriculum director, I don't know what that is. Oh, I'm going to write curriculum. I had no clue. So a few months go by, little negotiation there happens, and boom, we're starting a brand new company. We're in the Moore building. We have an
Hmm.
entire floor in the Moore building.
Wow.
This is expensive,
Beautiful.
beautiful, and another sort of dream moment of
Yeah.
from scratch, creating, ideating.
Yes.
What are we going to do? Just an incredible experience for a good year.
Yeah.
And then it got difficult at some point, and that's kind of how I ended up at FIU. There's a lot to that as well. Some
Yes.
amazing things happened with FIU Online specifically, but ultimately I ended up there in 2012 as an instructional designer.
Yep.
So building online
One
courses.
thing led to another. It's so beautiful, that
Yeah,
journey that you've
yeah,
been on.
yeah.
Yeah. Who was it that called you out as a leader? Who told you you're a leader? Who was that
Man,
person in your life?
so, oh my gosh. So I'm an instructional designer now at FIU Online, and an instructional designer is someone who sits behind a computer. A professor of a course sends you their materials,
Right.
and you then organize that into an online course with modules and units
Right.
and tests. So very, very, very rote, very scientific in a way.
Very heady too.
Yeah,
Yes.
just
Heady work.
structure,
Yeah.
organization, which was
Yeah.
something that I was very skilled at. Not a lot of creative opportunities, at least at the time, in terms of the way you're doing it. So I was really just building these courses. And there's a quick a message. We're using Salesforce internally, and
Yeah.
there's a message, and it says, if there's anyone interested in learning about success coaching, I am going on a trip to UCF somewhere up north, and anyone in the organization who would like to go, let me know. And I'm like, yes, me, please. And Monique, I'm not kidding. I mean, I don't remember how many people worked at FIU Online at that time. It was
Yeah.
definitely more than 60 or 70. It's a really big operation.
Yeah.
I was only one of two people
Who
that
raised their
applied.
hand.
Yeah.
Wow.
So one thing leads to another. So her name was Susan Clemens. Susan Clemens was brought in by Joyce Elam at the
Yeah.
time. I know these are names that most people probably don't know, but I know you know them.
Yep.
And Susan was brought in to launch essentially the fully online degree programs at FIU.
Yeah.
At the same time, she was basically charged with launching also student success coaching for the fully online students. So I go on this first trip with her. We're at Longhorn, I think. I had
Okay.
just met her. Literally, I'm in her car. We drive to Longhorn, it's 3 hours north of here. I'm with a complete stranger, essentially. And we're sitting at a table, me and this other person who also raised their hand. And we start creating what student success coaching is.
Yeah.
Never done that. I was not a coach at that time, but we're sitting there and I did have ideas and we were creative. It was incredible. We
Yeah.
get back 2 weeks later, she sends out another message on Salesforce, not to me, to anyone.
Yeah.
I'm looking for someone to facilitate a meeting to lead the discussion on the future of FIU Online's full degree programs. Is there anyone in the operation who's willing to facilitate this meeting? Me, please.
I hope you're all listening to this. Like, The lesson is raise your hand.
It really is. I mean, that is the greatest lesson that I've learned and that I hope that I have been able to teach along the
Wow.
way. So I end up not only do I end up facilitating the meeting, Monique, I create the agenda.
Yeah.
She didn't have anything in mind other than let's just do this, that was Susan's way. She
Yeah.
just saw something in the future and said,
Yeah.
we're going to do it. And then she would say to me, just figure it out.
Right.
So I facilitate this meeting, 17, 20 people show up. It was amazing. And from there, essentially, she offers me the opportunity to become the manager of the student success team, which essentially was building the team from scratch.
Yeah.
Um, and she said to me that day, because I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm an instructional designer. She says, no, you're a leader.
Yeah. Wow.
And no one ever said that to me before, ever.
Unbelievable.
And it definitely was transformative. And it was an amazing experience. And
Yeah.
from that moment on, I've only ever seen myself,
As a leader.
we're right or wrong, better or worse,
Yeah.
as a leader.
And,
And
and there's a lot to that because I tell people that I believe that we're all leaders.
yeah,
Everyone. My kids are leaders. Your kids are leaders. Doesn't matter how old they are.
yeah,
The question is, are you leading? And how are you doing it?
yeah,
Right? And do you know yourself? Are you leading with your strengths and talents? Right? So that whatever it is that you do and how you show up as a leader, you're engaged, you're happy, right? Because a disengaged, unhappy leader is not a good leader. That's
yeah,
a toxic leader, right?
yeah,
So we're all leaders. We just get to choose. This is where personal responsibility comes in. We get to choose what kind of leader we're going to be, right? And a leader doesn't have to lead others. How am I leading my life? What decisions am I making? How am I contributing to the world? How am I managing my relationships? How am I touching other people? How am I helping others? Right? These are the ways we lead. Um, so and I feel that deeply because when you have that, when you have another person in your life who can do that for you, it changes your life. It changes the trajectory of your life, which it did for you. So I can't believe we're coming up to the hour, but I'm not done with you yet because I really want to get to where you are today and the last conversation we had, which we were talking about, my gosh, where I am right now. I don't know if I can make a change, but changes need to happen. This team needs to feel good. This team needs to be empowered. This team needs to shift. I need to shift with this team so that I can feel like I'm still evolving and growing. Like, talk to me about happiness. Talk to me about the engagement of where you are now. And because of what you know and what you've learned and what you believe, the changes you have made and the difference that you've seen in your current department.
So FIU One Stop, in short, has always been it came together, for anyone who doesn't know what a one stop is. So a one stop is every university has admissions, registration, and financial aid. And then they have Office of Scholarships and student financials, right? All these different enrollment management service departments that are really front facing, that are helping the students navigate the system, right? Everything other than academics, essentially. And this one stop came together in 20, oh man, like maybe 2014, around there, give or take, and struggled tremendously. The nature of a one stop is difficult because one individual person has to know all the content of admissions, registration, and financial aid. And not only know it, be able to explain it to a student how everything impacts everything else,
Right.
but also absorb all the changes and updates and just constant complexities of a university system.
And troubleshoot, I'm imagining, right?
Troubleshooting
Yeah.
constantly. I mean, it's a very difficult job.
Yeah.
And when I joined the team in 2015 or 2016, they had just moved into a brand new building. The expectations were very high. There was a lot of eyes on it, and frankly, it was disastrous. Um, Hundreds and hundreds of students in the lobby to start a semester. No,
Wow.
not exaggerating, hundreds. The phones, we would get 30,000 phone calls during the month of August, like, when the semester starts.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd answer 5,000 of those 30,000.
Wow.
You had the president's office, you had the VP, I mean, constantly coming through, trying to figure out what we were doing wrong. And that was my first experience of leading an operation and really having to stand up and fight for my people.
Yeah.
So that was a really transformative moment very early on. And I don't want to get into the details of that
Yeah.
because it was very toxic and very, very disheartening.
Yeah.
So a couple years go by, we start to transform the operation. I have a counterpart who was hired, brought in, and the two of us just clicked. And through pandemic and out of the pandemic, my skill set, which at this time I'm really starting to understand a lot more of who I am and where I positioned myself. And you mentioned earlier that leaders have a choice.
Yeah.
I really didn't know that until this experience, because for the first couple of years, I had to maneuver. I had to keep maneuvering into the space where I could exist
Yeah.
because there was no room for me the way the operation was structured or it lacked structure.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of strong uh, motivations around me that were not necessarily for the staff or for the students. So I had to figure out where to be. And I always navigated back to knowledge creation, staff support, culture, quotes and stories and
Yes.
all that. I always ended up going back into these places. And eventually things kind of leveled out in this new regime and new people. And so that's what happened. So I ended up moving solely into that space. My counterpart is a strategic thinker. So he's looking into the future. I'm working directly with the staff, and
Yep.
we've built a culture, implemented a mission, a decree,
Wow.
best practices. We have vocabulary. Um, so it was really an incredible last 5 years. I mean, and this took a long time, and this was change management. We had to change a culture. We had to I had to lead people who did not want to be led, who didn't really respect past experience,
Yeah.
and who also were the people that started the one stop.
Yeah.
So it was extremely difficult and extremely challenging. But we were determined, me and Crazy were determined that we were going to make these changes because for our staff,
Yeah.
the morale was terrible, the service was bad, everything, things were rough. I mean, we were doing the job and students were getting stuff that they needed, but it was really, really rough. So jump ahead, about a year ago, we have levels, we have roles and responsibilities, we have people getting promoted,
Yeah.
uh, just a lot of amazing things happening. And I start to think like, okay, so what's next for me? The
Right.
operation is running.
Yeah.
We, right, everything's in place. I could go away for a week and everything's going to run perfectly. And this is
Beautiful.
the dream. This is the dream.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, what am I going to do? So another crazy moment, I joined a committee just on a whim. I had a friend who reached out to me. She's like, hey, I know you've been interested in these things. Would you be interested in joining this committee? So I joined the Diversity Day committee. I end up at the actual Diversity Day on the Biscayne campus. And the keynote speaker is Dr. Sandro Formica, who is the Chief Happiness Officer, Program Director. I'm not exactly sure his whole title, but he runs the certificate program through the School of Hospitality.
Yeah.
He gives a keynote speech and he spends 35 minutes on our needs. What do we need at work to be happy?
Hmm.
And takes us through a process in which we all write a statement of purpose and we stand up in our groups and we share out loud. And I was terrified, Monique. I had never written a statement of purpose. I had never told anyone like this is my purpose. And it was exhilarating.
Mm.
So I come to find out that he teaches a course in self-directed leadership, which you mentioned personal leadership.
Yes.
He calls it self-directed leadership, which
Yep.
is exactly the same thing,
Yeah.
right? It's leading from within, inside outward instead
Yep.
of outside in.
Exactly.
And I took the course, and it was just the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. It was a 2 weekend course,
Hmm.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like 50 hours of just intense,
Self-work.
essentially, yeah, self-analysis and
So,
sharing everything with a group of
wow.
strangers, things
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never would have shared with even with my wife. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Of course. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's true. We're afraid to do that work sometimes because we wonder how it's going to change our lives,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
change is good, right? We all want to change our lives, but we don't realize all that could change. by
Yeah.
taking that on. So it sounded like at that moment, before you took his courses and developed your statement of purpose, that you were a little disengaged at that point. You were kind of like, okay, I've made all these changes. My people are coasting, but I am now, I need to fill a bucket.
So this is where what I mentioned about I didn't know that a
Yeah,
leader could choose how to
yeah,
lead.
yeah.
I led instinctively,
You did. You're
and
very
I had
intuitive, very
yes,
instinctual.
and I
Yeah.
had two direct reports. And I would meet with my two direct reports, two managers. I'd be with them one on one, and then they would go lead their teams. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that I could meet with their reports. I didn't know that as the leader, I could say, hey, I want to meet with this person. So that was the transformation for me with two things. Number
Okay.
one, realizing through this process that so much of what Dr. Formica had shared and what I had shared and what everyone had shared throughout that 6 day period, I was I felt that I already like it was like one of those moments that I know there's a lot of feel, oh, I already knew that. I already knew that. And you're like, Shh, you put your hand down. You're annoying. You know what I mean? But I truly felt very connected to all of it. But I never had the vocabulary or the training or the understanding of the connections between your strengths and your needs and your values and your purpose.
Yeah.
And how if your needs are not met, if your needs are not met, then you're going to have a feeling.
Yeah.
You could connect the feeling to the need that's not being met. You could take an action to get that need met.
Correct.
That that for me was it all came together from college all the way to that day. And I was like, this is what I've always like I've
Yeah.
been on this path. I just had no idea.
Yeah.
It was just blind. I was blind to all of that and just really acting so much out of fear of failure, but very little of investing in
Yeah.
myself to be able to get out of that sort of mindset. So I immediately went back to the office after this experience and I shared it with my director. I'm like, the class was amazing. You know, thank you for allowing me to do this whole thing. And I, just like you taught me just now, I just said, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I implemented it immediately through the one-on-one process. I implemented it immediately with my managers. And I shared with them the background and what I was doing. And I gave them the option. I'm like, would you be interested in, in including this in our formal one-on-ones? Is this
Right.
something you'd be interested in talking about,
Yeah.
strengths and purpose? And immediately they were like, yes. And it was so natural
Yeah.
to sit across from these two at first. There were tears. I mean,
Yeah.
there were moments of like, oh my God, I don't know if I should even be here doing this job. And then those are scary moments,
They
but
are.
it was incredible. So
Yeah.
little by little, I started expanding it out. And today I have like 16 of the team, 16 members of the team that I meet with every 3 weeks regularly,
Yeah.
and we talk about them and their needs and how if what is your needs be are your needs being met today,
Yeah.
what can you do to increase a certain need, and we
Yeah.
talk about how everyone has tons of needs but none of those needs are always going to be met at 100%.
No.
And we're able to talk about happiness and that the idea of happiness is really an illusion,
Yeah.
right? There can be moments of happiness,
Yes.
and some needs are going to be met at 100% and you're going to feel great, and others are going to be less than. But then sometimes, there's going to be a change and a balance. So it's it's taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
The feeling in the office, a coach is only as good as the
The
a coach.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the feedback that you're getting. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm
Absolutely.
doing is working, is good, is valuable, unless the person I'm coaching tells me that.
Right.
And that's something that is very important. I have no value, right? The value is when each of them are learning about themselves, the
Yeah.
connections that they're making
Well,
through
you
conversation.
created the container for it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's really important because a lot of leaders don't create this container, and we do. I think one of the most important questions is that, we do this in the strengths world. We have individuals tell others, this is what I need from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
This normally doesn't happen. People don't have these kind of conversations,
Yeah.
but that's where the solutions lie, right? That's where we're kind of cracked open when we feel safe enough to say, this is who I am, this is what I need from you, in order to be happier, to be more engaged, to be more of myself and to be accepted, in the workplace.
Yeah.
I love hearing this. I love all of this. It's such a great example of there's always more to do. There's always a deeper level to go, right? Because you achieve so much and then you're like, what now? And have I lost my purpose in all of this? Like, what's my next level of purpose? And by going deeper within you, you found that answer, and
Yeah.
and you are an extraordinary leader, Drew. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
No, yeah, this is wonderful. I hearing all this out loud like this. I told you before we did this. I've never been interviewed really, and it's interesting. It's pretty cool to hear me say
Yeah,
these things out loud and be able to articulate them this way. I never would have been able to do this probably even a year ago. I wouldn't have
right.
been able to speak like this. But what I really recognize 100% is that the attention that I'm giving to each of my staff members
Yes.
um, has been for me the most rewarding is to see the response to that attention and to realize from each individual person that they're really not used to this kind of attention,
No.
especially at work.
Yeah.
And they're so surprised and the feedback and they're so free. They become so free with me to say like, thank you so much for telling me this about myself, or
Yeah.
thank you so much for helping me see this connection.
Yeah.
And I'm just floored by
Yeah.
that they really feel like they're surprised sometimes. They'll say like, I never imagined that I would have a conversation like this at work.
It's
But
uncommon. It's very uncommon. And
yeah,
yet we know that the reason why people leave their jobs is because of their managers,
yeah, yeah,
right? And it's usually because they're being ignored. The
yeah,
manager's not even having a conversation with them. So kudos to you because that's the first step is like, let me have a relationship with these people. Let me actually show them that I care about the job, care about them, ask them the questions, and all of a sudden they feel seen. It's not about micromanaging, it's about uncovering,
yeah,
right? People, uncovering the people.
yeah.
So, oh my gosh, so much good here. Thank you, Drew. This has been
Uh,
an awesome, fierce conversation. I'm so grateful to you. And I just know that so many people are going to find so much value in this conversation today. So, for those of you out there who are listening, please drop a comment. Please rate the podcast. We need your ratings to continue forward. And please, please, please share this with someone who you know is going to find value in today's conversation. So, thanks again for joining, everybody. And we'll see you next week on the
Awesome. Thanks
Fierce
so much,
Leader.
Monique. It's
You're
awesome.
so welcome, Drew.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome.